Hi, and welcome back to neurobiology in 5 minutes or less. In this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about muscle fibers and what is a muscle fiber. So to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about muscle cells themselves. So muscle cells are arranged in a very different way, in the sense that most cells, right, have one nucleus, and they are typically of a circular or maybe an oblong, ovally kind of shape, or in the case of plant cells, a little more square. But they're typically of a smaller size, one nucleus. These are typically the things we think of when we think of plant, and even more when we think of our own cells. Muscle cells, however, are as if you took a bunch of cells and smushed them together and then rolled them out really thin. So there are multiple nuclei within technically one muscle cell, and it's just because they are so long. So these myofibrils that you see up here in this first photo, which actually look very similar to like this sort of image up there, those are what we're going to refer to as our muscle cells. So like this is a muscle cell. You can see when you look across, right, like in one row, right? So if this is a row, there's one, two, there's three nuclei in one row. However, if you look in the row above, there's only one visible nuclei. And there could be others like scattered throughout that are not visible. But this is the big thing with just these in general, is that these nuclei are not necessarily all in one spot, and they are not necessarily all exactly identical. And this is part of the reason why muscle cells are so unique, is because they are not as identical as the other types of cells that we have in our body. And the way muscles contract is very interesting because it all depends on these uh, like myofibrils and these muscle cells all contracting together. So that's a very complex process. And looking at it, it's because this is what makes up a myofibril. And each one of these little discs up here in this myofibril, so like this little disc right there, that is called a sarcomere. And you can see how like on each one of these sarcomeres, there's like these little bold edges. So if I were to go through, that's kind of like the sarcomere distance, right? And these sarcomeres, these are actually represented in this image by these blue lines. So this and this is our sarcomere right here, okay? And you can see in the difference between these two images, right? The sarcomeres actually come closer together. And this is actually depicting muscle contraction versus muscle when it's relaxed. So when we start out, we have our thin filaments, which these are our thin ones, these red ones over here, and our thick filaments, these are our green ones. So the thin filaments are called actin, and our thick filaments are called myosin. See that here? And basically what happens during muscle contraction is ATP will come in, and at first calcium will come in, and it will remove a sort of cap, almost you could say, that is preventing these myosin heads, so these little green balls, from attaching and grabbing onto the actin. And then as soon as the calcium comes in and removes that, suddenly we have a rapid ATP hydrolysis happening that allows these myosin heads to crawl to the ends. They cannot get past the sarcomere borders, right? So they're going to contract as close as possible, and that's about where they end. So this is like the idea behind how muscle contraction works. And some things to keep in mind is that these ends of our sarcomeres are called Z lines, and this line in the middle is called an M line. And when you're looking at a photo of the cell, of a muscle cell, the Z lines are going to be the darkest parts, and when it's contracted, these will be very, very thick, versus your M line, which you can see here, like it doesn't, the myosin ends don't attach, right? So you only see your thick filaments. So um, in my contracted photo, this M line is actually going to be one of the most open spaces. So this is the basics behind muscle fibers and muscle cells. So